The biggest expectations to date for Mario Cristobal and Miami, and a lot is going to hinge on that first game at Florida.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching, carousel, the portal, and so much more. Always got you covered, getting you ready for a season that starts in 10 days. Donno, can you believe that? I can believe this episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Donno has got double duty with us here today. Alex Donno of Locked On Canes and Locked On ACC, if you did not know. He's joining me because we have Clemson's record prediction later. We're going to do Miami first, and then at the end of the day's show, teams that are not ranked in the preseason AP poll that could end up in the top 15. There's at least one in every conference. But let's start with Miami here, Alex, because I am more than a little fascinated to see how things play out, to see how everything's received. Miami has a favorable schedule. It doesn't mean it's a cakewalk. Week 1, they have a sub-field goal point spread game on the road in Gainesville. I think that game is pretty close to a toss-up. But the reason I mentioned that game in my open is that if they win that game, boy, it feels like they have a real chance to end the season 11-1 and wind up, whether they win the ACC or not, as a college football playoff team.
It's a super important game, and it's a game, like the part of it that gives me extra pause is the fact that the Swamp, it's one of the toughest road environments in the country. And, you know, I don't necessarily think like the heat and humidity will favor every team because they're both from Florida, but it's going to be super hot at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon in Gainesville. Like, yeah, I feel bad. I'm going to be at least in the shade in the press box. I feel bad for the people who are going to be sitting out in the open watching that game because it's going to be super hot. But both teams will hopefully, thrive in that environment. But it's like the reason why you feel like, environment aside, Miami should be able to win that game strictly based on the talent level. And, Miami, I believe, is deeper than Florida. And Florida also so far has been more snake bit by training camp injuries that Miami has, including their top running back, Montrell Johnson, who I'm sure was going to be a big part of their attack against Miami's defense in that week 1 game. But you're right. It's going to be a super important game, but I kind of look at it a different way for the importance because, you're talking about a non-conference rival. It's an opportunity on national television to kind of really show America, hey, this is what Miami's been working on. And, hopefully they come out and play well in that game, win or lose. But then at the same time, it's like, it'd be easy for me to sit here and say that if Miami wins that game, then that can become this snowball of momentum that turns into an avalanche. But I don't know, because we've had early season Miami wins before where it felt like this could be the start of something special. And sometimes when the calendar turns over into October, or in this case, it's late September, when they open up the ACC schedule, things just get wacky for Miami. Like they started 4-0 last year, including a team. The win didn't age that well because of, Texas A&M ended up being a hot mess under Jimbo Fisher at the end of the year. But it felt like a really big, and it was a dominant win at the time against the Aggies. And Miami started last year 4-0, and they were, steamrolling their non-conference schedule. And then things just got really wacky from there. So obviously that Florida game is super important for so many reasons, including Cam Ward's first game in a Miami uniform and, the first game of year 3 for Mario Cristobal, which is going to be such an important year as it is for every head coach in their 3rd year at a job. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think that game is going to decide the rest of the season for them, because for whatever reason, once they get into ACC play, it's just always a different season for Miami.
It's not going to define their entire season, but I do think that if they win that game, my confidence level, they go 11-1, goes up. Because when I went through and predicted every game, and I reserve the right when making these predictions here in August, we'll see what happens, the week of the actual games and whatnot. I can have one toss-up, and I can have a split. And I think Miami splits the road games at Louisville and at Florida. Both teams, they are games that I think Miami can win both. I think they can lose both, but I don't feel great about them doing either of those things. So I think you'll have one win and one loss and a bounce of ball, a call, a moment, a play, a drop, whatever it comes down to in the crazy world of college football. I think you'll have one win between Florida and Louisville. I've got a toss-up against Florida State, and I've got everything else down as a win here, Donno. And you talked about the snowball. It's Florida, and then it's Florida A&M, and then it's Ball State, and then it's USF. Do not sleep on the Bulls on the road. They should be a real solid team in the American Athletic Conference this year. Open ACC play with Virginia Tech. I'd be more concerned if that game were on the road. It's at home, so I think that's a win for Miami. They go at Cal, then the Louisville game, the Florida State game, and then down the stretch, Duke at home. I don't think Duke is great this year. I think they're okay, but Miami in year 3 with Mario Cristobal should be much better. At Georgia Tech, that's what we're going to call a revenge game. I don't think there's a chance Miami loses that football game. Wake Forest at home. They don't have the talent to match up. At Syracuse, first-year head coach. I know they have Cal McCord. I don't think they're a great football team just yet. So I've got 4 wins to end the year no matter what. And the pivotal games come down to Florida week 1, Virginia Tech, the 4th game of the season, or the 5th game of the season, rather, the ACC opener. That game is at home. The Florida State game, the Louisville game. And I've got Miami 11-1 or 10-2, depending on whether they can beat Florida State, which I think is tough, but not impossible, because I think these are the 2 best talent composite rosters in the ACC, FSU and Miami. I like Miami's quarterback more. I like Florida State's coach a little bit more on game day. That leads me to a toss-up.
Yeah, and my official pick that I put on record is 10-2, because, like you said, I think they'll win one or the other of the Florida State game or the Louisville game. Probably win one, probably lose one. I do think they'll beat Florida week 1, but like predicting the first game of the year, it's always tough because you don't know till you know, right? We're not gonna, is Florida being undervalued preseason because of all the bad mojo there with Billy Napier? Is Miami being overvalued? Like, we're gonna find out in that game. But it's like you outlined the schedule very well, Spencer. And it's not just about who they play; it's about who they avoid within the ACC. Because, last season they had a tougher schedule than they have this year. And a big part of that was you had both Clemson, who Miami did beat last year, and a very good NC State team who Miami lost to on the road last year. They avoid both of those teams this year. So you feel like it's a little bit of a luck of the draw there. Obviously, Miami never avoids Florida State because they're an annual rivalry, have been for many, many decades. So that's always going to be a tough game on the schedule. But I think they do get a little bit fortunate in avoiding Clemson, which, since it was a home game for Miami last year, would have been a road game if they were playing this year, and avoiding North Carolina State. And it's one of those things where Miami should have enough talent to overcome some of the nuts and bolts of the coaching stuff you put under the microscope. I'm not saying that all of that is magically cured, but when you have, a roster that in most position groups, there are some question marks about the defensive backs, because they do have some very young DBs who are going to be thrust into prominent roles this year. The only experienced guys they have in the defensive backfield are Daryl Porter Jr., who's a senior, and Mish Powell, who you covered in the old Pac-12, who transferred in from Washington. Those are 2 seniors, but for the other guys, you're going to be counting on some redshirt freshmen and some sophomores in the defensive backfield. But pretty much everywhere else on both sides of the football, they're loaded 2-3 deep with a lot of talented upperclassmen. So I think it's one of those things where the roster is starting to look like, what Mario Cristobal envisioned a Miami roster would look like. And then, obviously the elephant in the room would be, are any games going to be blown by bad game decisions? And I was having a conversation, Spencer, about this with someone earlier this week. So it's being reported, and I hope that they are finding the answers with this, that apparently there's been a lot of self-reflection within the staff, and they're working on some kind of a system of improving the communication and the checks and balances for late game situations to try to make sure what we've seen happen with Mario Cristobal in the past, including last year against Georgia Tech, that sort of stuff doesn't happen again. And listen, if that might just be another voice in the headset or just an open line of communication in the final 2 minutes, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. What play should we call? Is it time to call a timeout? Is it time to take a knee?
Well, it's got to help too that you have a direct line to the quarterback's headset.
That's a great point. Yeah, because I even wonder last year, like if maybe Tyler Van Dyke might have been thinking, wait, shouldn't I take a knee here? But he didn't have a headset microphone to say that on. I don't know if that was the case or not. But
I think only the coaches can talk to the quarterback. But still, it's a more direct. Right. I don't know. I'm just saying if you bring up communication and something they're trying to do to address it, that has to be something that helps. Having a veteran quarterback like Cam Ward doesn't hurt. I think Miami's RPO game could be lethal when you've got Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, that offensive line. I think the defensive line is nasty too.
Yeah.
But the Cam Ward, Damian Martinez combo with guys like Xavier Restrepo to get the ball to on the perimeter, I think Miami's offense has the tools to be good enough. And the question will be, will the game plan and game management and defense all be there? And I think at the very least, Miami's just going to out-talent a lot of the teams on the roster. The only one that I'd look at and say is, on par. I think Florida's probably closer than most people think. Virginia Tech might be as well. Florida State is the only team that I can decidedly say is at or above where Miami is at. But they have no Clemson on their schedule. Clemson does have 12 teams on their schedule. And you know what? I don't even know what to make of Clemson. I'm going to try anyway, and Donno's going to stick around and help me. But we have no idea what we're doing here. You don't want to miss that, obviously. You can't miss anything you want over at Game Time. They have everything that you want. They're an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. They make getting tickets faster and easier, which is great for you. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for, they've got it. They have all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You got to turn it on, but once you do, boom, you are money. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College. All one word for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Donno, let's take a stab at Clemson here. And the reason I don't have a great feel, I could see myself being spot on with the record prediction I have of 9-3. I could be 2 games off. I could be 4 games off in either direction. I guess technically I can only be 3 games off because we're just doing regular season game predictions here. If it goes up to one side. Like, I don't have a great feel. Now, Clemson does have one of my favorite things here on the show, and everydayers know this. If you return your quarterback, your coach, and your offensive coordinator, that is a rarity in college football. And I think that is a big advantage for Clemson because they return Dabo Swinney, Cade Klubnik, and Garrett Riley, who I think underperformed based on the expectations he'd set for himself the prior year at TCU, which is a credit to Sonny Dykes and what the Horned Frogs could maybe be this year in a potential bounce back year. But for Clemson, they recruited a top 15 level. They don't utilize the transfer portal. And so the question becomes, how good is their roster compared to everybody on their schedule? Vegas doesn't think they're at Georgia's level. Guess what? I don't know that anybody, except for maybe Ohio State or Oregon, I don't even know if they're on Georgia's level at this point. So that's not a real major knock because they're about a 2-touchdown underdog going into Atlanta week 1. I think they're going to lose that game before winning their next 3, I think. But like at a glance, if I say Clemson's roster is ranked blank in the ACC, what are you putting in that blank?
I still think that they're probably 3rd or 4th just based on the rosters. I think we're both in agreement that in whichever order, Florida State and Miami are number 1 and number 2. Actually, I'm really high on NC State. I don't know.
Me too.
I don't know if it's because I let Kenton Gibbs talk me into it every single. But I'm really high on NC State, so it's like I kind of have to decide, which and maybe NC State's roster is. I really like their quarterback Grayson McCall, and I like their weapons. So I'd probably put Clemson 4th in roster, which just based on what Clemson was as recently as 3 years ago, far and away the best roster in the ACC. Now I love that formula that you use about returning the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and the quarterback. The only problem that I have with it in this case is I'm not sure if returning Cade Klubnik is a good thing, because I feel like if Dabo Swinney,
maybe
if he was like, any other Power 4 coach and believed in the transfer portal, I think he would have been looking at a guy like Cam Ward or a guy like Grayson McCall or Will Howard, all these quarterbacks that were available in the portal. I think that's an area where he might have looked to upgrade it. And listen, Klubnik is obviously not a terrible player. He's a top recruit coming out of high school. You've seen some flashes with the Tigers, but his decision-making throughout has been poor. So you just have to wonder if him being like an upperclassman, is he just going to overcome some of that based on sheer experience? But the decision-making has been so questionable. The turnover-prone issues, which always seem to come at the most untimely points, always seems to be when Clemson's driving in the red zone is when they turn the football over. That was a huge problem for them early in the season. They did rattle off, I think, was it 5
that game against Duke was insane.
Yeah,
I can't remember a game like that for Clemson ever, and that was one of their 4 losses last year. But you and I were talking about this before we hit record. Like, everyone talks about Clemson in a negative sense because they have fallen down from where they were. Yeah. But if you just ask the casual fan who has a negative perception of Clemson's program, how many games did they win last year? How many people would know off the top of their head they won 9?
Right.
They won 9 yet. Now, if they win 9 games this year, they're not going to the playoff. And I don't think they can get there because, look, I like Cade Klubnik. I wouldn't say I love him, but I like him. 64% last year completion, 19 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Here's where I'll step in and defend him. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at the timeline of college football players' development, Cade Klubnik is a more traditional guy, particularly at the quarterback position. He gets some playing time his freshman year. He's handed the keys his sophomore year. He shows glimpses, but he has drawbacks. And by your 3rd year, you're usually realizing your full potential. And so that's why I struggle to say Clemson's going under their 8.5 win total. They're winning 6 or 7 games. I'm like, I don't know. It's not like he's unproductive. It's not like he has no weapons to throw the ball to. There's a question on the roster here or there, but that's why I land on 9-3. I've got losses. I've got losses to Georgia week 1, at Florida State in the middle of the season. I don't think they're winning that game. I think they lose at Virginia Tech because I like Virginia Tech. And
I think NC State's going to get them even on the road.
I thought about NC State because I'm like you. I'm a big fan of Dave Doran. I love their offseason, quite frankly. I think this is the best chance NC State has had in the last 2 or 3 years to get to that 10-win threshold, be it in the regular season or winning a bowl game at the end of the year. But Clemson at home is still not a place that's easy to go in and win. And that quote-unquote bad Clemson team last year, you got to remember, pushed Jordan Travis and Florida State all the way to overtime. You'll probably have Clemson fans say they should have won the game. So I still have some level of faith, but I do really feel with NC State in there and a road game at Pitt, you never know if that could get crazy or anything. Probably not. But that's how I land on 9-3 for Clemson.
Yeah, I'm at 9-3 as well, and it's funny because like for a lot of teams around the country, 9-3 would feel like a pretty good season, but their 9-3 record, I think they went 9-4 with the bowl game, but 9-3 record last year. That was their lowest win total since 2011.
8-4 regular season. 9-4.
Oh, so they won the bowl game. Okay,
9-4 with the bowl game. Yeah,
I couldn't remember if the bowl game was a win or not. But their 9 win total last year was their lowest since 2011. So I think that's again part of the reason why it felt like such a poor season for Clemson when it really wasn't that. And they still have a lot of talent. I mean, R.J. Mickens in their defensive backfield, I'm a huge fan of. I'm a big fan of Phil Maffa. Now he's going to take on a bigger role in the offensive backfield this year, but I think he can handle a heavier workload this season. They still good up front in both trenches, but I think one of the differences with Clemson now, Spencer, was you go back 3, 4, 5 years, and they used to have SEC, like top tier SEC type of depth compared to teams in the ACC that didn't have depth up front. Like, Miami had a really long losing streak against Clemson, and they just got their butts beaten every time they faced Clemson during Clemson's glory years. It's because Miami was getting manhandled. Most teams in the ACC were getting manhandled by Clemson, but it's teams like Florida State, obviously. I think Miami at the line is, Miami did well against them at the line of scrimmage last year in Miami's overtime victory, and NC State. I think teams like that have closed the gap when it comes to that line of scrimmage talent. Now, I wonder if that's true for Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech may be more of a skill position and reliance on their quarterback and playmakers. I don't think they can match Clemson as much up front, but I see what you're saying. On the road, that could be a losable game for the Tigers. So I guess when I think about how bullish I am on NC State and Virginia Tech, obviously Georgia is going to beat Clemson opening week. Florida State will probably beat them. So I guess I'm somewhere between 9-3 and 8-4.
I think the ceiling for Clemson is 10-2 because I will write in Sharpie a week 1 loss, essentially at Georgia. It's a neutral site game, quote unquote, in Atlanta. But okay, ask Oregon how that went a couple of years ago. It didn't go great. I think between Florida State and Virginia Tech, you're losing at least one of those games if you're Clemson because they're both on the road and those are good football teams. We'll see what Virginia Tech's actually capable of this year. Certainly FSU's the more likely loss, but I see a minimum of 2 losses. I think the maximum, though, I can't with this schedule unless they drop a home game to South Carolina. I can't see them losing more than 4.
No.
If you lose all 3 of Virginia Tech, Louisville, and NC State, that's still that's 7-5, and I just can't see Dabo Swinney losing all of those games. 1 or 2, sure, but do you think Clemson is so bad that they're just, anytime they go up against a good team and they play a close game, they're going to lose them all? They might not win them all, but I don't think they're losing them all either.
No, I mean, as long as you're right about the ceiling not being as high as it used to be with Clemson,
right? But
a Dabo Swinney coach team, the floor is always going to be super high because even though he refuses to play ball, Clemson does have an NIL program. I know some people will claim, they don't use that. No, they do use NIL, not at the level that certain other programs do, just in terms of, the bids that are being thrown out there, but they're a little hesitant with the NIL stuff, completely hesitant to the transfer portal stuff. That lowers the ceiling severely, but Dabo Swinney's a heck of a football coach. The floor is always going to be high for them. So, for as long as he's their head coach, it's hard to see them doing any worse than 8 wins. And part of it is, part of the reason why their ceiling is low, it's the same reason why their floor is high, because one of the things that Dabo uses to his advantage is the fact that everybody knows he doesn't use the transfer portal. His roster retention is very high because you're not recruiting over guys. So you're not giving guys reasons to leave. So as long as you're a good developer of talent, which Dabo and his assistant coaches have proven that they are over the years, as long as you develop talent well, it's also going to help you recruit, because when you're recruiting players, that's why you've been consistent, top 15. Obviously, there are years they've been top 5 in recruiting. It's certain angle of it. There's less negative recruiting for other programs because they can't tell you, hey, if you go to Clemson, you're not good your first year, they're going to replace you with somebody in the transfer portal. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. So I still think that there's a net negative for not using the portal, but Dabo in certain angles uses it to his advantage. You're always going to recruit pretty well, and you're going to be able to retain most of your roster.
Donno, you got any interest in top 15 dark horses? You got an interest in that conversation?
Heck yeah.
Okay, yeah. Donno's still going to be here right after this. All right, let's start in the ACC. That's your bread and butter. I got this question from Evan. If you'd like to submit a question, by all means, hit me up on Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB. What is a team outside the top 25 that could finish inside the top 15? I think there's at least one in every conference. I think there are 3 group of 5s. Donno, I came up with 3 ACC teams that have this sort of potential. And by the way, this happens every year. Going to talk about this more on tomorrow's show, because we'll talk about a team that is in the top 10 preseason that could end the season unranked, and an unranked team that could end the season in the top 10. Because guess what? That happens just about every year in college football. Wild times. I start with Virginia Tech when I look at the ACC, and it's twofold. Number one, they are top 2 in the country in returning production. Number 2, they are returning a quarterback who, as long as he's able to develop the passing element of his game, I think can be good enough, and he's a dynamic runner, that being Kyron Drones, of course. I like their head coach, Brent Pry. He's got him on an upward trajectory. I could see them as an unranked team getting in there. Their schedule, not brutal. Not incredibly brutal, not so hard that I couldn't see them winning. 9 games is probably the minimum that you would need. I also put from the ACC Louisville and SMU into this conversation. SMU is the most fascinating team in the ACC, even more fascinating than Miami. I think they are wildly compelling because of all the rapid upscale investments they've put in their football program. It is here and now. They want to compete now, and if they come in and are an ACC contender in year 1, I think it lessens the blow of Florida State and Clemson leaving one day.
I'm totally in concert with you on SMU, and it's not only because it's a super talented, well-coached offense. I think the defense is going to have some things to prove stepping up into the Power 4. But
Agreed.
Rhett Lashley's an offensive genius. Their quarterback, Preston Stone, is perfect for that system. They've got weapons all up and down the field. They got a ton of speed all up and down the field. But then the other thing that works in SMU's favor is, Spencer, their schedule is, I think it's like in the 80s strength of schedule, 70s or 80s, according to the Phil Steele magazine. I was going through his whole ACC preview a couple weeks ago. Like they've got one of the easiest Power 4 schedules out there. Like they might have had a tougher schedule in the AAC last year than they have in the ACC this year. So that should do them wonders as well for SMU. So I think they could sneak up on a lot of people. I don't think that's a team that is ready to be like an actual contender for the ACC championship yet, because I think they'd probably get out muscled on the line of scrimmage by the top 3-4 teams in the conference. But I do think that's a team that can finish top 15, maybe top 25. I'm very bullish on them finishing in the top 25 because the schedule for them is cake. I fully agree with you on Virginia Tech, and I'll just add something on Kyron Drones. There are a few quarterbacks in the country that have worked harder in the offseason. I had a chance to talk with Kyron a little bit at ACC Kickoff Media Days a few weeks back, and I've talked multiple times with Cam Ward, who talks about the workouts that Kyron Drones, and Shedeur Sanders do together. They have the same offseason quarterbacks coach, and I don't think these guys have any hobbies outside of football. I know Cam Ward fishes, but I don't think there's anything. This guy just fishes and plays football all day. I think it's the same thing with Kyron Drones. So that dude works incredibly hard. So I co-sign on Virginia Tech. Louisville is super interesting because, we
tough
talked about
schedule.
That's the thing.
I hate their schedule. I think their ceiling is 9-3. I did their record prediction last week. I think they're probably 8-4 or 9-3, closer to 8-4. I think their ceiling's 9-3 because you look at their schedule and you're like, ooh, ow.
Well, and the other thing with Louisville is that I think so much of their success is going to depend on the health of their starting quarterback because they're Tyler Shuck. If you can guarantee he's healthy, I think it's a big upgrade over Jack Plummer from last year, but that's a big if. Because and it's been a lot of fluky stuff. Like it almost feels unfair to call it like injury prone. Because when you break your fibula, I don't know if that's like a fluke. I think anybody, if you get hit hard enough.
I think that's random.
Yeah, I think it's random, but at the same time.
But then why do the random injuries keep happening to him?
Exactly. Like all the random injuries. Like this young man has been so snake bit due to injury. He's when it comes to quarterback whisperer head coaches, he's got that now at Louisville with Brom. But if he just hasn't shown he can get through healthy seasons yet. So I think a lot of their success is going to hinge on that. And then, like you said, there are certain teams in the ACC that have favorable schedules this year. We talked about SMU. We talked about Miami, who's got, a manageable schedule compared to what they usually have. But Louisville, the schedule gods were not kind to them.
No, they most certainly were not. So I think those three could all be into the top 15 by the end of the year if they hit or get near their ceilings. In the Big Ten, I'm going with Nebraska, who I predicted on the show to go 9-3. You got a great defensive staff, promising young quarterback. Now, that's where my hesitation comes in is true freshman. He gets to ease into it a little, but
still good though.
he could be really good. Could be really, really good. They have Colorado week 2. That's going to tell us a lot about Nebraska's season. I think they win that game. They're favored by about 6.5 points. It's in Lincoln, and they're out for revenge after losing 36-14 in Boulder last year. In the Big 12, I love this pick. I love it so much, I'm going to save it for the very end and get through the others. The SEC doesn't really have one because everyone that could be good is already ranked in the preseason top 25.
Amen.
The answer is Florida, I guess, because Florida's schedule is so brutal. If they go 8-4, they would be in the top 15.
If they go 8-4, they might make the playoffs. If they go 8-4, their schedule's so tough.
They might deserve that 100%. I would also watch for Evan 3 Group of 5 teams or no G5 teams in the top 25. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Donno. But I don't think there were any Group of 5 teams in there. Memphis, Tulane, Boise State. Those are some of the G5 heavy hitters. You could watch for a UTSA. You could watch for a James Madison maybe. But my favorite pick here, if you gave me one team, even more than the ACC squads, unranked, who ends the season in the top 15, give me the Golden Knights of UCF. This is a program that is ready to be a Big 12 team that isn't just capable, competent. They've got a proven, winning, Power 5 starting quarterback. I love their head coach. Their transfer portal class rocks.
Yeah.
And you forget that last year, were they perfect? No. This is a team that played the Big 12 runners-up in Oklahoma State and throttled them the way most teams beat their FCS opponents. Like, I think UCF could be a real, just like SMU in the ACC, UCF could make that jump. They would be my number 1 pick for you're outside the top 25. You're going to end the season inside the top 15. Last week of the regular season, Donno, I have them beating Utah.
Ooh,
in Orlando, game is in Orlando, not in Salt Lake City. I'm not right, crazy, okay? I'm not on drugs here, but like, I think that's going to be Utah's one loss in the regular season.
Well, and I can speak for their infrastructure being not too far from their campus. It's actually, a lot of people don't know this about UCF, but I think that like they've got the second largest student body enrollment. I think the second largest in the country, behind only Ohio State. Those rankings may fluctuate, but as of recently, they got the second largest student body in the country. They've invested a ton in their infrastructure over the past 10, 15 years. They had that season where they celebrated a national championship. They didn't get into the national title game, but they had that undefeated year, and they had a parade, and they had rings and all that. But it's a program that's been close before, but they're building it the right way. And when it comes to not only the nice on-campus stadium, good infrastructure facilities, but they've also become, competitive players in the NIL space, which is obviously something that, programs need to be near the top in this era. So I could see that happening. I think this could be a year where they start to peak again.
By the way, top 25 transfer portal class in 2024, the recruiting starting to tick up a little, top 30 in the class of 2025. I'm just saying, you watch out for those Golden Knights.
There's a lot of recruiting talent in the Orlando area. I know
it's
that
loaded.
Loaded. Like Miami recruits
yes,
a ton of guys from there.
Admittedly, you have to go up against Miami, and you have to go up against Florida and State. Florida Atlantic is down there, South Florida. There are a lot of schools down there, but now because they've gotten the invite to the Big 12, they are squarely the number 3 program in the state of Florida. And gosh almighty, I look at what the state of Texas has produced over the years. What's the number 3 football program in the state of Texas in the last 15 years? Probably TCU?
Yeah.
Probably, like, Texas, you'd say, is, probably number 1, just kind of off top. I mean, there are a lot of different factors you can look at. A&M has to be, they can recruit at a very, very high level, but then it's like TCU. What does TCU do? Oh, yeah, they've gone to the national championship game. Yeah. So don't sleep on those nights. Alex Donno, Locked On ACC, Locked On Canes. Donno, appreciate you coming by today.
Always a pleasure, Spencer. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.